In problem number 30, we are going to compare the graph to the parent function. The parent function is x squared. Outside of the parentheses, I have plus 3. That moves the graph up 3. In problem number 31, inside the parentheses, I have x minus 4. What makes that 0? If I put in positive 4, that makes this graph move right 4. In problem number 32, I want to find the vertex and the axis of symmetry. The axis of symmetry is what makes the perfect square 0. So the axis of symmetry would be x equals negative 2. When I plug in negative 2, this is 0. So I end up with positive 3. So my vertex is negative 2, 3. I can also calculate this value and I get positive 3 also. On problem 33, I want to figure out if it's a maximum or minimum value. I want to figure out the domain and range of the graph. So first thing I need to do is figure out the axis of symmetry. What makes this 0 is positive 2. So here's my axis of symmetry. So my vertex, if I plug in f of 2, I end up with negative 5. So I get 2, negative 5, so that's right there in the graph. This graph curves up. So that means I am going to have a minimum value. Then I'm going to read my graph. My domain is all reals, because those are my x values. And then my range are my y values. If my graph, my vertex is here, and then I read from here up. So y is greater than or equal to negative 5. In problem number 34, we're going to talk about a transformation here. Here's the parent function. If I go minus 5, that is going to move the graph down 5. And then I'm going to look at my binomial, because this is vertex form. What makes this 0? Negative 2. So negative 2 is going to move it left 2. And then I'm going to look at my a value. Is going to be a stretch 3. In problem 35, I'm going to find the vertex and axis of symmetry. This is written in standard form, not vertex form. So I need to calculate my axis of symmetry. It's opposite of b over 2a. That formula will be on the final. Here's my a, here's my b, here's my c. I plug them in, I get negative 4 for my axis of symmetry. My vertex, I have to plug in f of negative 4, and when I do that, I get negative 42. So when I plug in negative 4, I get negative 42. On number 36, I am going to find if it's a maximum or minimum, and I am going to find the range. So this is standard form, so I need to do my ABC. My axis of symmetry, I plug the values in my ABCs, I get negative 7. My A value is 2. That means it curves up. If it curves up, it's got to be a minimum value. So I'm going to calculate my vertex. I am going to plug in f of negative 7. That's how I got negative 118. So here I have negative 7, negative 118. My minimum value is my y value. So my range has to be greater than or equal to negative 18. Problem 37. They give us a formula for a bridge. So here is my formula. And they want to know how high it is above the river. And they want to know how long the section is. So how high it is, I need to figure out the axis of symmetry. So I calculate, here's my A value, here's my B value. I plug those in. This is my height. To figure out my vertex, I need to plug this value in. That's how I got 388.08. So my distance is going to be, I'm going to add those two values up so I get the total distance. In problem 38, we are going to factor. The factors have to multiply to 6, and they have to add to -5. You can use your factor sheet. So I am going to look on my factor sheet, or just do this in your head. So I got -3, -2. I'm going to check to see if this is true. So I check my middle terms. These middle terms add up to -5, which is the middle term, so I know I did it correctly. On number 39, we are going to factor this. So I look at both terms, and I notice right away -3 comes out of both of them. That's how I've got -3. I also notice that x, they both can be divided by x. That's how I got this. Make sure you check your answer to see if it's correct. And I will do the distributive property to check to see if it's correct, and it is correct. In problem number 40, I want two factors that multiply to -64, and 0 is the middle term. So I am going to try +8 and -8 when I check my middle here. So I have 8x and -8x. That gives me 0. There's no middle term, so that's factored correctly. In problem 41, I am looking for the solutions. So I need to factor this. What multiplies to +6 and adds to -5? Those numbers are -3 and -2. And then I'm going to do a mental check to make sure I factored it correctly. So those multiply out and do give me -5. So I am going to look at this first binomial. What makes it 0? 3, because 3 minus 3 is 0. What makes it 0? 2. 2 minus 2 is 0. In problem 42, we're given a function that models a stone being dropped from a cliff. They want to know how long will it take to hit the ground. So in other words, the equation's got to equal 0. So I want to solve for t. First I need to get t squared by itself, so I am going to subtract 578 from both sides. And then after I do that, I want to get t squared by itself, so I'm going to divide by -16. So I got t squared. To get rid of the square, I'm going to do square root. So I got about 6.01 seconds. Problem 43, I'm going to add complex numbers. Notice this says I am adding. So I am just going to write 3 and -2i. And then I have +2 and -2i. I'm going to combine like terms. So I put a circle over my real numbers. That's how I got 5. I got -2i and -2i, -4i. In problem number 44, we are going to subtract. So my first complex number stays the same, so 2 stays as 2. And then -2i stays as -2i. When I distribute this negative, negative times negative is +1. Negative times -2i, that's how I got the -2i. And then I put circles around my real numbers and combine them. That's how I got 3. And then I put squares around my imaginary numbers, and that's how I got -4i. Remember, the operation goes with the number after it. In problem 45, I want to know the zeros of the function. So if x is by itself, that is 0. If I have x minus 4, 4 makes it 0. 4 minus 4 is 0. If I have x minus 5, 5 makes it 0. 5 minus 5, 0. Problem 46. What makes this 0, negative 3? What makes this 0, 3? What makes this 0, 4? In problem number 47, I'm going to use synthetic division. First, I look at my binomial. What makes this 0, 2? That's how I got 2. I am going to write the coefficients. Here's all my coefficients. So I wrote all my coefficients here. I am going to take my first number and bring it down. So I just brought this number down. And I'm going to go 2 times negative 6. That's how I got negative 12. I am going to add these. That's how I got 6. And I'm going to continue the process over again. So I'm going to go negative 2 times 6. That's how I got that 12. And I'm going to add them. I continue the process, and I get 0 for a remainder. I start out with x cubed. I've come down 1 power. So now I have x squared. So I'm going to use these coefficients. So negative 6 is here, 6 is here, 7 is here. In problem number 48, I'm going to do synthetic division again. I look at my binomial. What makes it 0? 2 makes it 0. I am going to write all my coefficients down. Notice one number is missing, so I'm going to add a 0. Here's all my coefficients. I am going to bring the first number down. That's how I got negative 4. I'm going to multiply 2 times negative 4, negative 8. I'm going to add these. That's how I got negative 17. And I continue the process. This times this, negative 34, and add them. I continue this. I start out with x cubed. That's how I got x squared. And then I write all these coefficients down. Notice I don't get 0, so this is my remainder. In problem number 49, I'm going to use its distributive property. I am going to distribute negative 4x squared to everything. That's how I got this. It says standard form. That means my exponents must be in order. X to the 5th comes before x to the 4th. In problem number 60, I want to describe the end behavior. My degree is 7. That's an odd degree. All odds start down, end up. In problem 51, my degree is 5. That's odd. Odd degrees have to be opposites. So this one starts down, ends up. In problem 52, I am going to use a quadratic method. I have x to the 4th. It's first got to equal to 0. So I'm going to add 225 to each side. I got to figure out two numbers multiply to 225, add to negative 34. Those numbers are 9 and negative 25. So negative 9, negative 25. These are both perfect squares. I'm going to factor this. So I get x plus 3, x minus 3. No middle term. I'm going to factor this. X plus 5, x minus 5. What make these equal to 0? And there's all my answers. In problem 53, same thing. I have to the 4th power. First make it equal to 0 by adding 576 to both sides. It's got to multiply to 576 and add to 52. So I listed out all my factors by using my calculator. And the two that worked were 16 and 36, both negative. Notice these are perfect squares, so I could factor out the first perfect square and the second one. And then I'm going to go ahead and list all my zeros. Number 54, what makes this 0? Negative 2. So I am going to go ahead and multiply this out, bring down the first number. That's how I got my 3. Then this times this goes here. And then when I finally divide it out, that's my answer.